Welcome to Education, Leadership, and Beyond, Surviving and Thriving. My name is Andrew Murata, host of the show, and it is show number 236. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy February. Lots in the hopper here. Valentine's Day, the Super Bowl here in the States. And just a busy time, a nice time. We got President's Week vacation coming up here in New York. So a lot of these things here in front of me. Proud member of the Education Podcast Network, Voice Ed Radio Canada, or wherever you are consuming these podcasts. Leave us a question, leave us a comment, and excited to be rolling tonight. I have had over 200 guests on the podcast. I have never had a rock star on, and I am pumped up to meet my friend Ravi. Ravi is an incredible I don't know. I don't even know where to start, Ravi. We're going to have you on here in a moment. He is an incredible speaker, has an incredible story, and just a real artist and a real person with heart, person building connections and relationships. And I'm excited to talk with him, and we're going to learn his story. So it is show number 236. Let's get rolling. My opening concept is, it's called The Bright Lights. Ravi's performed on many types of stages, musically, speaking in front of aviation groups, and now speaking globally around the world to education groups, involved in bringing nations together. I mean, it's incredible. But it's the bright lights. And whether you're a high school principal, an elementary principal, right, when those bright lights come on for graduation, whether you're a refereeing official, many of my brothers and sisters out there refereeing, when the bright lights come on for the big games, 10,000, 20,000 people in the stand, right? Or those moments where you just have a lot of eyes on you, a school board meeting, a high school gymnasium, right? When those bright lights come on, how do you perform? How are you your best in those moments? And I'm going to ask Ravi that question when we get started. But I ask that to you. What are some things that you do to prepare for those bright lights? Because you could be great in a little meeting. You could be great on Zoom. You could be great with 2 or 3 people. But when those eyes come on you, when the pressure comes on you, when everyone's watching you, how do you perform in those moments? So a couple bits of advice, a couple little things. Number one, prepare. Right? Have your stuff ready. Your speech, your thing. Nobody wants you to see you reading from the thing. Number two, know what you're prepared, but know the setting, right? What the time is, it outdoors or a rain date? Number three, know your audience, right? Know your audience, who you're talking to, what's the environment, what's going on there. And number four, you gotta act confident. Right? You might be nervous. You might be a little scared. That's okay. Right? It's okay. You got to act confident. So just a couple tips there for when you're in those moments of the bright lights. Enough of me talking. Let's bring Ravi into the program. Here he comes all the way from Chile. Ravi, great to see you. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. Ravi and I met in Oregon at the School Boards Association. Shout out to Jim Green and OSBA. Ravi, it's an honor to have you on. And let's start right there. We're going to learn your story in the show. But Ravi, you performed in a lot of places, in a number of different settings. How did you prepare for those bright lights?
I think the tips that you just gave are right on target. I mean, you got to be prepared. You got to know what your subject matter is, whether it's music, whether it's when I was in aviation and talking to aviation audiences, or whether it's going up in front of a room full of incredible educators that are changing lives every day. I need to know, number one, what I'm going to talk about. Number two, as you said, who your audience is. And you just got to be prepared. And the other aspect of it that I think is really important, and this only comes from practice, but you got to know how to improvise, and I was trained as a jazz musician. And that was probably one of the best trainings I've ever had for life, but also for speaking, because things go wrong. Look, we're live today. Anything can happen, right? And when you're speaking in front of an audience of hundreds or thousands or dozens or five, doesn't matter. Things can go wrong, and you got to be able to run with it. Humor is a real important part, developing the craft of humor so that when those moments happen, you can kind of laugh your way out of it with the audience and have them laughing with you instead of at you, right? As the saying goes. So those are all kind of techniques that I think I've certainly tried to work on and perfect it, as part of my craft in order to be able to handle those situations. And when you know you can do it, well, that's preparation. That's being prepared for the unexpected. And as I like to say, being able to pivot when you need to be able to pivot.
Nice shout out with the book there. Guys, Ravi was incredible on stage. I had a chance to see him again in Portland, Oregon. And Ravi, you just have an amazing story. I really, I referenced the Dos Equis commercial, right? The world's most interesting man, but you're right in there. You're right there. I mean, a musician, again, in the field of aviation, now in the field of education, and you related your story. You started out telling your story about your relationship with school and your journey with your music teacher and what your mom did for you. Get us started getting to know you here. Tell us that journey through school and how music transformed your life to, making you an all-star musician.
Well, I think the short version of the story is that I didn't get school. I just couldn't relate to it at all, and I didn't understand how it was going to help me become Angus Young of AC/DC, which was my dream. And that's since I was 11 years old. I thought, wow, maybe one day I could be a rock star. And by the age of 14, I was determined that was the pursuit I wanted to have, not necessarily as a quote unquote rock star, but I wanted to be in the music industry. I had found my passion, and I knew what I wanted to do. And I just didn't relate to school at all. And, I had to find my own path, and I had to find my own mentors, and I had to convince my parents who, were big believers in education, that I needed to pursue my own path and my own journey. And what's interesting about it now, when I'm speaking to education audiences and education leadership specifically, is I realize that a lot of what I'm talking about is how important it is that we provide those opportunities for students to find their own way and not necessarily conform to the traditional pathways that we think students are supposed to pursue. But at the same time, when I tell that story, I realized, wow, my education worked, because it really contributed to my confidence in being able to pursue my own path, my ability to find my own passion. It worked. And I hope that that's what I convey to my audiences, is that I've sort of gone through this as a student thinking it wasn't working, and looking back at it and go, wow, I had everything I needed in my public education growing up in Connecticut. And it provided me with the tools and the skills, combined with a good family, and parents who were willing to support me, which is a huge part of it. One of the things I talk about in my book is, parents can't outsource the education of a child to a school. They have to remain participants throughout that educational journey. And that was the fortune that I had. My parents were involved, despite their own problems, despite their divorce, despite everything. They were still involved and supportive of my journey. So it was the whole package that worked. My public education, my family, and my ability to find some outside mentors as well to guide me on my path.
And one of those mentors was your principal. And just the way you told that story of him, and then the pictures you had, it was just beautiful. Tell me about that relationship with your principal
Yeah,
you had all those years.
wasn't my principal. It was my superintendent, even more distant.
Oh, yeah.
That's what was so
Sorry.
weird about it. And it was because, the only reason why I connected with him 30 years later, because I grew up in a relatively large school. We had almost 3,000 kids in our high school.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know my superintendent. I knew he was, but I didn't don't think I had ever met him, and he certainly didn't know me. But when the New York State Council of School Superintendents hired me to give their keynote, um, and I realized I didn't even know what a superintendent was. I thought it was a guy, that fixed stuff in an apartment building. I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, right? That's what a super was.
That's a super. Call the super.
Call the super. The plumbing isn't working, So, I realized when I called the Board of Education, I said, whatever happened to Dr. Fleischman? For some reason, I remembered him. And 3 days later, I got a call from Dr. Fleischman saying, "Hey, Ravi, heard you're looking for me. Give me a call."
Love
And he
it.
signed it, his first name, Ernie. So I called Ernie and I invited him out to lunch. And what I discovered in that lunch, amongst many things, but the thing that really struck me was that he was superintendent from 1976 to 1989, 13 years. Well, I went to kindergarten in 76. I graduated high school in 89. I only had one superintendent. So I realized this guy was literally the architect of my education. And I had a whole new appreciation for him, for my education, for superintendents, and just for how the whole public education system really works, based on my reconnecting with him 30 years after I had graduated high school.
What a great story, and just how you shared that. And then, Ravi, you rolled into a professional music career. You had a big run with the Hanson brothers, and you guys were at the top. You were there, and then you shared how Napster, brought that down. Tell me about that journey of going up, and how fast it what happened there. Tell us that story.
Yeah, overnight successes, there's no such thing, right? It's a long journey. And it was, for me, as I said, by the age of 11, I had a dream. By the age of 14, I was determined to pursue that dream. And, I left, I finished high school and enrolled in New York University because I wanted to stay in New York City. I thought that's where my music connections were. And where I could really build my career. I had contacts in the recording studios. I had my own recording studio before I even graduated high school. I wanted to maintain that business. And, all of that led to me leaving university early and using the money to really build my studio. And that led to clients who went off and did amazing things. And then at the right time remembered me and referred me to Mercury Records when they were looking for a young guitar player for a band that nobody had heard of. They were about to launch, and it turned out to be Hanson. I was hired in February. We did our first gig in March, and by August, we were the top selling band in the world. It was crazy. Yeah. And we did everything you can imagine, from, Madison Square Garden with Aerosmith. That was a huge highlight. We did Letterman, Dave Letterman's show, Tonight Show with Jay Leno, Today Show, Good Morning America, Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live was great. It was the year that the movie As Good as It Gets came out, and Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt were the hosts.
Come on!
And not only that, it was the Christmas special. So that got repeated many years, which was nice. Royalties kept coming in for years because it was the Christmas special. But they also had the big Christmas party afterwards, so I got to hang out with Jack, and stuff, pinch me, right? Is this really happening?
Wow.
And then we ended the year doing Bill Clinton's Christmas party at the White House. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. And I remember just standing, just a few feet away performing while the leader of the free world was just sitting there politely nodding his head to the groove, probably wishing he could jump up on stage and play.
Because his daughter was a fan, right? I mean,
yeah, Chelsea was probably one of our most famous fans, and she convinced her dad to hire us to do the Christmas party. So we did the White House Christmas party that year.
Wow!
And it was insane. It was crazy, and I lived my dreams. I surpassed my dreams in the music industry. But then this thing called the internet, came about, and peer-to-peer networks and file sharing started to become very pervasive. And how, as I say in the keynote, what Uber did to taxis, what Airbnb has done to hotels, Napster did to the music industry.
Yeah.
And it happened first. It happened a long time ago, and the music industry didn't know how to handle it. So our contracts were all, put on hold. Everybody's records that were coming out were put on hold. Happened to a ton of artists. and everything just sort of fell apart. And it was kind of weird. I was 25 at the time, having had this dream since I was 14, having worked really professionally in the industry in some capacity since I was 16, since I opened my recording studio at the age of 16. My dreams were shattered all of a sudden at 25. I thought everybody I was meeting was going to make my career. And then they started sending me their resumes. And I was like, what are you talking about? You were supposed to, you know, have my solo career after Hanson. And now they were all looking for jobs. So
Yeah.
I had to pivot. That was really the first time where I had to pivot. And I realized that the ability to do that is a skill that we have to be teaching students, because I look at my career now, that was the first one that I pivoted into becoming a journalist and a speaker in the music industry at that point. And then I pivoted later after the 2008 um, global financial crisis. I pivoted into aviation. And then in 2015, I pivoted into keynote speaking and education.
Yeah.
You got to reinvent yourself. And this is a very important skill that we need to teach students. And that's the basis of my book, Pivot, is really how do we incorporate that type of education into every student so that they can always adapt as needed in an unpredictable environment.
Ravi, it's an amazing story of resilience, creativity. I could take these questions in a lot of ways. Many people ask, I used to referee too. Andrew, do you miss it? So do you miss that stage of music? Do you miss that bright light of being a rock star? I mean, you guys were on top of the world. Do you miss that?
Um, no, and for two reasons. The first is I really got my fill of it. I really enjoyed it. I absorbed every moment. When we did Madison Square Garden with Aerosmith, for example, you get in the morning, you do your sound check, you go back to the hotel, you come back at night, you do the show. I didn't go back to the hotel. I sat in the nosebleed seat for hours, literally hours, and just watched the empty
Everything.
arena. I've been in that arena so many times for
Yeah.
what? For Knicks games, for other concerts, for other stuff. Growing up in the suburbs of New York City, Madison Square Garden was the dream. And I sat there for
Ah,
probably 7 hours, 8 hours, and just, you know, literally had the arena to myself pretty much. And realizing that all those times I've seen other people on the stage, tonight people were going to be seeing me on that stage. So I didn't waste a moment of that experience. I really
mm.
absorbed it and enjoyed it. I wrote a book about it afterwards called Dancing with Hanson that Simon and Schuster published about that whole experience. So I feel like I made the most of it. Then now I find myself on stage with audiences that challenge me, that make me, that push me to a higher level, because I have a different relationship with the audience than I ever had in the music industry. Music industry is airplanes, vans, hotels, stage, vans, hotel, airplane. You don't get to hang out and meet your audience. You don't really
Mhm.
get to learn from your
Mhm.
audience. You get a lot
Mhm.
of energy from them, but you don't really get to grow from that experience. That's what I get from keynote speaking. That's what I get from my audiences. And because you met me in Oregon. I closed the bar down with my audiences. That's you for me, that's part of my education. It's part of my enjoyment. It's part of how I stay relevant. It's part of how I keep learning and growing, is by listening to my audiences. I never had that opportunity in the music industry like I do in the speaking industry. And so for me, having had the full fulfillment of what I did in the music industry, and now having the constant, welcomed challenge that I have as a speaker, doesn't make me miss it at all. And I get it. I don't know. It's a different kind of energy, but it's an energy. It's a good energy that I
Yeah.
get from being on stage. I'm still on stage, and
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
I can relate the same thing with refereeing, really just that in and out, and I know exactly what you're saying. Ravi, tell me about the I'm going to use the word responsibility, right? The responsibility of providing that influence. Your keynote was one of the best I've ever seen. You took us on a journey. You had that audience like, wow, what a story. The pictures, just the whole thing. How do you handle that responsibility of, hey, I want to change these people's lives? What do you put into that, and how do you feel about that stepping on that stage to really take these people on that journey?
Well, I do recognize it's a responsibility. I mean, it's not only a responsibility of my client who's hired me and who's paid me, but every person sitting in that audience is investing time and hoping that their time is going to give a return on that investment, and that they're going to walk away with something. I take that very seriously. It's one of the main reasons why I got into education, is because I can speak to a corporate audience. I can speak to lots of different audiences and have real estate, whatever. Um, but what I realized once when I spoke to a superintendent's group, and about 4 months later, a teacher sent me a picture that their sixth grader, I think it was, had drawn with a quote. And it was a quote from something that I said at that superintendent's
Mm,
conference. I
mm.
realized at that moment, wow, what I said at a superintendent's conference trickled down to the principals, to the teachers, to the student.
Wow.
Now, I don't know how often that happens, but I know it happened. So I know the potential is there. And that means that there is an opportunity that I have as a quote unquote influencer, I guess, that should not be taken for granted and should not be wasted. So there's a lot of responsibility that goes into that. So I do a lot of research. I make sure that I'm not just putting stuff out there that is not actionable. You know, I'm definitely an idealist, and I make that pretty clear to my audiences, because I think one needs a healthy dose of idealism out there in the world, because that's where the vision comes from. And I think that my keynote offers my audiences a big vision,
Yeah.
but it's my job then to break it down so that it's actionable, so that they can actually take something useful, put it into action that's going to make the difference in a child's life, in a family's life, and in a community's life.
But you're not just talking about it though. You're doing it. Those videos of you bringing kids together from around the globe. It's one thing to talk about it. You're
Right.
doing it and then urging others to do it. So you're modeling it really for others.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, part of it is, wow, this surprised me. I did it. I should talk about it. The other part of it is, I'm going to talk about it, so I should do it to make
Hmm.
sure that it's right. You
Yeah.
know, so there's both sides of that. So part of that responsibility is making sure that the suggestions that I'm offering, that the anecdotes that I'm uh, recollecting, and the statistics that I'm presenting actually work. You know, and if I can make, that's the other point. If I can make them work, boy, they're. I know I'm not by any means the smartest guy in the room when I'm on stage talking. So if I can make it work, all these smart people in the audience can not only make it work, but they can run with it and make it work even better. You
Yeah.
know, the good example is the Ravi Unites schools thing of bringing students together from around the world, classrooms together, and just talking. You know, I know that there are so many people in my audiences that can take that ball and run with it and explode with it, you know, make it so much more impactful than I even could.
Ravi, tell me about the creative side. I mean, you're a true artist, right? Music, aviation, flying planes, talking to people, flying planes, and now education. I mean, you're a real artist, and you spoke beautifully, but your presentation was also beautiful, really. Tell me about the create. How do you create? Where do you create? When do you create? How do you do that?
You know, the PowerPoint itself. I don't know if you're thinking of that specifically, that technical aspect of it, but the PowerPoint itself. One of the great things that great pleasures I get is designing the PowerPoint. It is creative. It is artistic. It's visual. It's a visual art. I don't put a pencil in my hand. I can barely draw a stick figure. I mean, that is not my skill. But when it comes to putting together these presentations, that's part of my opportunity to develop my visual skills as an artist. So, you know, that to me is important. And one of the greatest compliments that my audiences give me about the PowerPoint is, that was PowerPoint. They
Mm,
don't realize, because I focus very much on making sure that nobody notices slide transitions.
Sure.
There are a lot of animations. There's a lot of flow. I want it to look like a movie, and I'm clicking like every few seconds as it's going on behind me.
It was a
So from
story. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, from a creativity point of view, it's a performance art. It's a multimedia presentation that I think I offer my audiences, and that's what I really try to deliver. So even sometimes people ask me, you ask me, how do I miss being on stage? Some people will ask me, do I miss the creativity of writing a song, because I don't write music that much anymore. Um, but I get it in other ways, and
Yes.
just the design of the PowerPoint is actually kind of a good example of that.
Yeah. Well, and the story. I mean, the way you told the story, you can tell you are a true artist there. And I mean, it was really great.
You
Ravi,
know,
go ahead.
storytelling is something that we need to be teaching, because everybody's got a story. Their ability to tell it is what's going to help them become successful. And storytelling is what engages people. Storytelling is what builds networks. And it to me, it's just I don't know. I guess it's somewhat natural because I wrote songs for a long time. I wrote lyrics. I've been telling stories, through music for a long time. So this is again part of why we need to keep the arts in education, is that it helps people not only create students create their story, but teaches them how to tell their story.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And man, you did a great job there. Ravi, the New York City area, the East Coast, it's a very diverse area, but you've been around the world where in parts where maybe it's not diverse, right? And if you look at him, people say, is he black? Is he white? Is he Native American? What's his
Right.
background? Tell me about living in this diverse world we're in, but have you experienced racism in the work you're doing? You were with an all white band, and who's this other guy? And who is he? What is he? Tell me about racism and the work in your journey.
Right. So, aviation is a good example. The aviation period of my life, 2008 to 2015. I got my pilot's license in 2008. And then I was a very active speaker at aviation, and hanging out with people like Buzz Aldrin and Gene Cernan, all these astronauts
Yeah.
and Tuskegee Airmen, all these amazing people. But aviation is 5% women, 1% African American. It
Wow.
is a very um,
Wow.
not diverse, whatever the opposite of diversity is. It is not a diverse group of people at all. And I don't know how that industry really accepted me, or if they did, or what to make of me. I think they love the fact that this new young guy was enthusiastic about aviation, but at the same time, the industry itself, the community itself hasn't proven to embrace people that are different from themselves.
Mm,
So I don't know. Is there a ceiling that I might have hit in aviation? Probably. There was probably a ceiling. Doesn't mean I couldn't have pushed through it, but there probably was. Now, you mentioned being the brown guy in the all white band. I have a feeling maybe that's part of the reason why I got the job. So maybe it worked for me in
sure.
that way. Maybe they saw, okay, this is somebody that can reach and broaden the market. Because I was hired by the record company originally, and then the Hanson brothers, the Hanson family hired me after that, their company. But originally I was brought in by the record company. Well, why? Maybe I can't say for sure. So the answer to the question is yes. I've felt that my race has perhaps affected me positively and negatively in everything that I do. So I don't know. Maybe it's a net neutral. But that's the way I look at it. I
Yeah.
know that there's no, of course, there's racism in the world. There's issues. I know that people see me in different ways in different circles.
Yeah.
When I lived in New Orleans for a while, and that's a very interesting and complex environment from a racial point of view. And I always tell the story. I'll tell the short version of the story of the first time I was in New Orleans. I had a white cab driver take me back to the airport. And when I got out, we had a conversation on the way. When I got out, he turned to me and said, "We need more people like you in this city." And then about 6 months later, I was back in New Orleans. I had a black cab driver drive me to the airport. He turned around as I was getting out and said, you know what we need in the city? We need more people like you. I moved to New Orleans. I figured I found my place. I lived for 3 years after that. So, I mean, hey, racism exists. It's a good question, but I think we can also learn and find ways where it works in one's favor and it works against you. I mean, it's not correct. It shouldn't exist, but it does. It's so, that's the world we live in.
Yeah. And you talked about that in your speech. You also talked about your privilege that you came from a line of amazing family and people, and but you talked about it as a positive. Look at what these other people have done who came from privilege, and that you felt a calling. I appreciated that part of your talk, that it's not a bad thing. Look what I'm doing with it.
Yeah, and privilege it's a funny thing. It's something I didn't want to talk about. Now, look, I come from the first family of India. My great uncle was Jawaharlal Nehru, the first prime minister of India. Indira Gandhi was my cousin Rajiv Gandhi. We had three prime ministers of India. My country, my family fought for independence and created the world's largest democracy alongside Gandhi. So it is something that, and then I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. I mean, a very wealthy a town. My dad was an investment banker on Wall Street. He decided not to go into politics and instead became one of the first Indians on Wall Street. And he felt a lot of racism actually in that. But he thought it was a good thing. He said it taught me to work twice as hard, and I've always worked twice as hard, and probably made me more successful than I would have been otherwise. He always thought it that way. So privilege is another thing that I sort of felt like maybe it would disqualify me in what I'm talking about. But then I did some more homework and some research, and I realized, well, you look at Martin Luther King, look at Mahatma Gandhi, look at Nelson